Alright guys, today we're going to talk about two different processes, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. They are very similar, which you will see soon. So what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is how plants make their own food. So unlike us who are animals, we can just go get our food whenever we're hungry or thirsty. However, plants can't do that. They're stuck in one place. So they have to create their own food. And they do that by using energy from the sun, and this type of energy is called light energy. And they convert it into chemical energy, which in this case is actually sugar or glucose. If you remember, we talked about glucose being a carbohydrate. So that's a review from macromolecules. So once again, in photosynthesis, you're converting light energy from the sun to chemical energy, which is a sugar, for use by the cell. Now, below you can see the formula for photosynthesis right here. Okay, so the first thing we need is carbon dioxide, and that's actually what you breathe out. So without us, plants would not be able to survive. So they need our carbon dioxide production in order to do photosynthesis. The next thing they need is water, H2O, sunlight. So without the sun, this process does not work. So they need all three of these things in order for photosynthesis to take place. Once the process occurs, the things that are created or produced are glucose, so C6H12O6, and oxygen, which we actually need. So if you go back to the beginning over here, we said we create this carbon dioxide that the plants use. Well, they create this oxygen for us over here that we use. So we need each other. So what performs photosynthesis? This should be a review. Organisms that create their own food, so plants, are called autotrophs. That should be a review from middle school, but in case you don't remember, autotrophs are any organism that makes their own food. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the chemical formula for photosynthesis. I already told you that it was carbon dioxide right here and water plus sunlight gives you sugar and oxygen. So on the left side of these arrows, anything on this left side are considered reactants. They are called that because they're the things that react together to create something. So our reactants for photosynthesis are carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. You need those three things to react together for this reaction to occur. Now on the right side of the arrow, these are called your products. It's whatever is produced. Okay, so in this case, our photosynthesis products are glucose, which once again is C6H12O6 or sugar, and oxygen. So our products are what is produced through this reaction. So where does photosynthesis happen? We already talked about this a little bit whenever we did cell organelles. So it actually happens in the chloroplast, which is located in the leaves of plants. So CO2 enters through the pores in the leaves called stomata. So over here you can see this picture that has a piece of a leaf on it. This image right here is actually a stomata. And that is where our carbon dioxide enters the plant. So we breathe out our carbon dioxide. It goes into the stomata for the plants. And this is also where water and oxygen is released out into the atmosphere. So our carbon dioxide goes into the plant, and the plant sends oxygen back out to us. So the stomata is really the site where gases are exchanged. Water enters through the roots. So hopefully you guys already knew that, but in case you didn't, whenever you water the plants, the water goes into the ground, and the roots are what take that up. And if you remember when we talked about properties of water, cohesion actually pulls that water up into the plant from the roots all the way up to the leaves. And then sunlight is also absorbed by the chloroplast. So the chloroplast is where the whole process of photosynthesis happens within the leaf, and sunlight is absorbed by those. What are chloroplasts? So like I said before, this is the site of photosynthesis. It is located inside the leaves of plants. We talked about how our plant cells have chloroplasts. Remember, because plants perform photosynthesis and animals do not. They're filled with a pigment called chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is actually what gives plants their green color. So that is why you see a green color when we're speaking about plants or when we refer to plant cells. There are two main parts of photosynthesis. We have something called the light reactions and the dark reactions. So in the light reactions, sunlight is captured, so that sunlight goes into the chloroplast and ATP is created. Now remember, when we talked about cell transport, ATP is cell energy. So this is just another word for us to say energy, and we'll talk more about ATP later. The dark reactions is the second part of photosynthesis. This is when ATP makes glucose, which is that sugar, and the glucose is referred to as chemical energy. So remember, sunlight was solar or light energy, and the glucose is chemical energy. And then this process in the dark reactions is actually called the Calvin cycle, and you do not need light for this to occur. So if you look over here, sunlight is required. You have to have sunlight in order for the light reaction to occur. Over here, in the dark reaction, it is not inhibited by light, so that means it does not matter if it's light or dark. So some things that might affect photosynthesis: light, water, and carbon dioxide. Now this is because these are the three things required to make photosynthesis occur. So for example, if there's a lack of water for the plants, it's going to inhibit their ability to perform photosynthesis, and the plants might not have enough food. Same thing for the others. So if your light is inhibited or if your carbon dioxide is inhibited, all of those things can cause a problem in photosynthesis. Okay, so that was the end of photosynthesis. So remember, just to review, let me go back to the beginning. Photosynthesis is when plants use energy from the sun to create energy for the cell. So we have carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight mixed together to create sugar and oxygen. And remember that oxygen has to go somewhere, and what needs oxygen? That would be us. So the next process we're going to talk about is actually cellular respiration. So in cellular respiration, the definition is that organic molecules are broken down to release energy for use by the cell. So what does that mean? Well, down here you can see our formula for cellular respiration. It's very similar to photosynthesis. It's actually the opposite. So in photosynthesis, remember, photosynthesis creates sugar and oxygen. Well, we need these things for ourselves to perform cellular respiration. So we take in this oxygen that the plants created, and we also take in sugar. So glucose and oxygen react together to create carbon dioxide, water, and then instead of sunlight, we create ATP, which, like I told you before, is energy. So this CO2 here, this is actually sent back to the plants. So it's kind of a continuous cycle, back and forth. So why do we need cellular respiration? This is how we create our energy. This is how we get energy for our cells to work. And our energy, once again, is called ATP, and that is the energy for life. This occurs in both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, and it is how both cells get their energy. What performs cellular respiration? So remember, we talked about how plants are called autotrophs because they already make their own food. Well, heterotrophs are organisms that cannot create their own food. So these are some examples. Humans, we cannot create our own food, so we are called heterotrophs. Lions, bears, and baby chicks. So any organism that cannot create its own food is called a heterotroph. So this is very similar, once again, to photosynthesis. So we're going to talk about the reactants and the products of cellular respiration. So the reactants here are what is reacting together to make the reaction happen. So we've got glucose and we have oxygen, and remember that oxygen came from the plants. And when those two things react together, they produce these things over here. So our products are on the right side of this arrow, okay? There's the carbon dioxide, water, and energy or ATP. And remember, this carbon dioxide gets sent back to the plants because they need that for photosynthesis to occur. So there are actually 3 steps to cellular respiration. Remember, in photosynthesis we had 2, so that's a difference. The first part of cellular respiration is called glycolysis, and that is when our sugar is split apart. So if we go back and look at this reaction here, the reaction starts with sugar. Well, in glycolysis, this sugar is broken apart. It occurs in the cytoplasm, and this process creates 2 ATP. And this can occur whether oxygen is present or not present. After glycolysis, we have a couple options. So we can either go through aerobic respiration or anaerobic respiration. Now, aerobic respiration means that it occurs with oxygen. So if you have enough oxygen right here for the reaction to occur, then we're going to go through aerobic respiration. If there is not oxygen, then we go through anaerobic respiration. And in this process, it's very important to note that less ATP is produced, and we'll go over that in just a minute. So remember, aerobic is with oxygen, anaerobic is without oxygen, and during anaerobic respiration, much less ATP is produced. If you go through the path of anaerobic respiration, a couple different things can happen. So either we can get fermentation or lactic acid production. So think about if you've ever been working out or playing sports and you've got some sort of cramp in your muscles. So that's actually because your cells are not getting enough oxygen. And if they're not getting enough oxygen, then they're no longer performing aerobic. They have switched to anaerobic. And in anaerobic respiration, that lactic acid is what causes your muscles to cramp up. So this is the pain you might feel if you've been working out really hard or playing sports really hard. That lactic acid builds up because your cells have switched to anaerobic. The second part of cellular respiration is the Krebs cycle. So this occurs when oxygen is present. So here, if oxygen is present, it undergoes glycolysis and goes through aerobic respiration. So these 2 steps go with aerobic respiration. Okay, so we have the Krebs cycle, which also creates ATP and takes place in the mitochondria. And we have the electron transport chain, which is the 3rd step of aerobic respiration. And remember, that's when oxygen is present. This also creates ATP, and it occurs in the mitochondria. So here, remember back when we were talking about the differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. I told you in anaerobic respiration, less ATP is produced. Your cells want to go through aerobic because they want more energy. So here, this is just a comparison. Now, you don't need to remember these exact numbers at all, but you do need to know that anaerobic respiration produces a significantly less number of ATP, okay? So over here in aerobic respiration, you have 36 ATP, okay? So a significant larger amount of ATP is created during aerobic respiration. The aerobic is ideal. That's what you want to occur. However, your body has adapted, and if you can't perform aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration can also occur. So I also just want to note that it's really important to understand that cellular respiration doesn't just occur in humans, okay? So all cells need energy. So plants have mitochondria as well, so they're also performing cellular respiration. So that is the last note.